Hi, everyone. This is Carrie Worthington. I'm with NARUC. I'm just going to give everyone another second to connect. And you are in breakout session 1 with Commissioner Dan Scripps and Indiana Energy and Economic Development Director Jennifer Richardson. I still see people coming in, so I'll give them another second, but this topic is on the evolving role of federal and state responsibilities, and especially in light of the recent FERC order 2222, or double
deuces.
Double deuces, yeah. So I have my first question for our panel. The first question is, how might FERC's order 22222 unlock benefits from distributed energy resources for retail customers? For example, requiring regional grid operators to allow DERs that participate in utility programs to participate in wholesale markets. Commissioner Scripps?
Yeah, I think that, and I first need to say that I have a number of staff on here as well, and should have thanked them as Commissioner Sugar did, and particularly Eric Hanser, who wrote the briefing notes that he didn't know I'd be using for this, but have been super important. So thanks, Eric. I think it's important. I mean, when the PURPA decision came out this summer, I think, I have lost all track of time. Maybe it was earlier than that, but I think, you know, a number of us looked at it and said, you know, it probably struck the right balance, but, and I've said this before, but the idea of PURPA is to allow an opportunity and a pathway to markets. And as long as it continues to do that, it's super important. I think that's essentially what 2222 does, is to provide a pathway to markets for some of these distributed resources to participate in the wholesale markets that had previously not been available to them. And I think that is the most fundamental piece. There's a whole lot of details that are important, but really sort of if you're struggling at the retail level, there is a different path that allows your resources to show up and be counted. And you know, Michigan is in the middle of a net metering discussion at the legislature, and some of our utilities were close to hitting the statutory caps. There's other pieces that are going on, I know, in states across the country on some of these resources. And so having a path to the RTO in places where RTOs exist, I think is pretty critical.
Thanks, Ms. Richardson.
Sure, I agree with Dan. I think allowing the pathway forward in and of itself is not necessarily where a lot of the challenges are going to be. Specifically, I think the devil is in the other details, unfortunately, in large measure. And to the extent that states are managing a transition, which many, if not most, are right now, be it a transition in their fleet, transition in regulatory process, just a whole host of issues, right? Indiana certainly is not immune to that. We are in the middle of a significant and very robust transition for our fuel sources. And while our processes are very robust and steady and very stable, how we manage the DER issue going forward is a whole nother question. Our legislature right now is undertaking of what this transition looks like for the future, and what, if any, regulatory enhancements are needed to be able to manage it. It's not necessarily a question of whether we should do it, it's how we do it in the most responsible and affordable and transparent way for consumers.
Thank you. And then if anyone in the audience has any questions, you can chat it into the chat box, and we will try to get to those. What benefits might arise from the rules requirement for coordination among the regional grid operator, the DER aggregator, the utility, and the retail regulatory authority? Commissioner Scripps?
Yeah, I think that's super important. And because this is, I mean, I think it's an acknowledgement that these resources sort of show up in lots of different places. There's a role for state regulators that's ongoing. Often these resources are connecting to the distribution grid that is served by the utilities and load serving entities, but then, you know, aggregating up to ultimately allow participation in the RTO. And so sort of identifying that each of those seats needs to be at the table, I think is critical. And there are a number of others. I know I don't want to sort of get in front of your questions, Carrie, but on double counting of resources, for example, and how to avoid that. I think if you don't have that level of coordination, it makes that question sort of much more difficult to solve. But if you've got a process where folks, you know, who are touching different pieces of this are already at the table, particularly then with the guidance that it allows for some of these things to be worked out. I also think, I mean, the distinctions, and Matt, Commissioner Sugar talked about this as well in terms of, you know, these are ultimately interconnecting again to the distribution grid, identifying and clarifying that the retail regulators have ultimately authority over the interconnection process. It's the market participation piece that ultimately goes to the RTOs, I think is critical in terms of ensuring safety and reliability of the grid. Those are things that simply can't be overlooked as you're looking for sort of better market performance or fewer barriers.
Thanks, Mr. Richardson.
Yeah, I think just adding briefly to that, you know, some states I know right now are undertaking an examination of interconnection standards for to accommodate these types of emerging technologies. And again, I go back to, you know, some of my original comments that the challenging part is the DERs that come in, you know, there's no one size fits all, right? Some of it is rooftop solar, some of it is EV, so some of it's storage. It can come in lots of different forms. I do think, as a general rule of thumb, the clearer your statutes are with regard to authority, the better, the better position I think states will be in. As a general rule of thumb, the more robust your existing processes are, I think it will make it easier to move forward. Trying to weave your way through and navigate this path right now without existing process is very, very tricky. But having a seat at the table, managing existing process and enhancing that process where it's appropriate for your particular state ultimately is the best way to measure, you know, quantifiable benefits going forward for customers, for sure. And staying engaged. States have to stay engaged. It's one thing to say, no, this is our jurisdiction, but actually, you know, letting it happen and taking steps forward to make sure that that happens is something completely different. It can be very daunting for sure. I don't think anybody has a complete playbook on this. We have relatively limited examples of how this is working across different jurisdictions. And so I think it's incumbent upon, you know, helping each other and working together, you know, through organizations like NARUC, NASIO, DOE for sure, to look at best practices, things like that, that ultimately will help.
Great. Thank you so much for bringing up those points.
Hey, Carrie.
Yeah.
This is Chris. Can I go back and ask Dan a question from his first go around?
Sure thing, Commissioner.
Thank you. Hey, Dan, so you were talking about in Michigan, the legislature's looking at net metering. It would seem to me that anybody that's being net metered would have absolutely no interest in being aggregated and participating in a wholesale market. So help me understand how that comes together.
I think that's right. Just in terms of the level of compensation versus something that you'd get out of the wholesale markets. In Michigan, in 2008, the legislature enacted the net metering program and then capped it at 1% of total load. And then there are subcaps within that, basically 1/2 of 1% total load for residential customers. And the other half is split between sort of larger customers up to 150 kilowatts, and then methane digesters up to 550 kilowatts. In 2016, the legislature updated that and moved us from net metering to distributed generation and then directed the commission to come up with a tariff model that utilities would then implement in rate cases. We've got one open, so I can't talk about the specifics of that particular one, but it's essentially the model is an inflow outflow where you are credited for what you're pushing out to the grid, and then you pay sort of the normal rate for what you're taking, the retail rate. And so we believe it reflects cost of service, and that is and I think is closer to probably the market, what you get from the RTOs, although it's still probably, because of some elements, higher than for example, LMP as a standalone. And so I agree with you that if you're getting a full retail credit under sort of traditional net metering, my strong sense is that you have zero interest in being aggregated. But as states increasingly move to something that's a little less rich than that sort of initial foray into net metering, like our distributed generation tariff, I think you get closer, and it also, for states that don't have a net metering program, or if you're past the cap in Michigan, and the utilities don't have to take you anymore, that provides another option.
Very helpful. Thanks, Dan.
Great, thanks. And we did have a question that came in from the audience, and since you mentioned LMPs, I am going to ask it. So the question is anyone considering an overhaul of how locational marginal price, LMP, is calculated in order to get a true cost of energy?
I would know that was Paul Proudfoot's question, even if I didn't know that was Paul Proudfoot's question. I think it begs the question. I mean, it absolutely is sort of, it's one of these things, and I think we've all talked about it, where if you sort of, change one variable, it sort of has this domino knock-on effect, and it sort of raises all the other variables. And in some ways, I think you find out sort of where the pain points are, or where the system maybe had assumptions that are now different as it gets rolled out. But I think it absolutely sort of raises the question. I'm not sure that anybody is actually looking at it yet.
Ms. Richardson, do you have anything to add? No. Okay, I will keep going. So you did mention this a bit also, but do you have any concerns about the rule not allowing PUCs to broadly prohibit DERs from participating in regional markets? Ms. Richardson?
I think that's really, of course I have concerns. I mean, I don't like any state to be preempted on anything, just as a general rule of thumb, but especially these types of issues. But I think it really is up to the individual state on how they want to proceed. I mean, I think the important thing to remember here is, and Dan alluded to this in some of his comments, we're not all starting from the same place, right? We're not all cookie cutter approach to resource adequacy or approach to resource integration. And so I think that's very much a threshold issue for some states that may not have gone as far as other states have early on with previous FERC orders, for instance, DR and some of the energy efficiency matters early on several years ago. And I think, but right now with DERs, though, again, it's kind of in your face. You have to sort of make this decision on what path you want to go down. And if it's something where you feel you need to enact, whether it's administrative rules or something to take to your legislature from a policy standpoint, I don't think states are going to be able to get around it. I think it's something they're going to have to deal with sooner rather than later.
I'm glad Jennifer went first so that I can say I agree with Jennifer this time. No, I agree. I mean, we as state regulators have voiced our concerns on some of the jurisdictional boundaries that FERC has been drawing over the last several years. We challenged the storage order. We lost. I think this sort of is consistent with it. But it's also, this is consistent with it. And it seems to be that this is the direction that FERC's going. And so it is, I think, as Jennifer said, you sort of have to get your mind around that this is where it is. And states sort of, it allows for, I guess, a more level playing field within RTOs, even if I continue to have some heartburn on sort of continued erosion of state jurisdictional reach.
Thanks. Sorry, my button's moving around here on me, but okay. So how does Order 2222 change how states approach interconnection rules? I'll go to Ms. Richardson.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, again, I think, so this is an issue that came up. Dan and I are on the NARUC-NASDO task force for comprehensive distribution planning. And this was a huge issue that kept coming up in the course of our discussions, actually, is where is that level playing field, so to speak. Right now, I think it's sort of well understood that there's not an existing playbook for this. There's no clarity right now in rules on the how, let alone the what. And so I know we've had some recent meetings and we've heard from various stakeholders from across the country, not even within Indiana or Michigan necessarily, but just all over the place. And folks have said uniformly, for the most part, that there has to be a hard look at these interconnection standards, if for no other reason than looking at certainty of availability around reliability. Are they going to be there when they say they're going to be there? It has a major impact, among other things, for not just compensation, but keeping the lights on, for basic reliability. If utilities are considered to be providers of last resort and they have these obligations that are attached to their provision of service, and we're leveling the playing field at both the retail and the wholesale level for these other additional resources, then this has to be part of the discussion. Now, it may dissuade some providers, some aggregators from coming forth. It maybe have a stifling effect, I don't know. But from a policy standpoint, and I would think, I mean, Dan can speak to this better than I, but I would think from a regulatory standpoint, that type of standardization is going to have to be explored and examined thoroughly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, just as a threshold piece, I am certainly relieved that that FERC didn't decline to say that it was going to go all the way to sort of interconnection. That, in my mind, is clearly on the state side of the line. And for the reasons, Jennifer, I mean, it is core to reliability. It's core to safety, the way that circuits work and the potential to overload. There are a myriad of questions that I don't think RTOs can get at and shouldn't. I mean, they are clearly on the state side of the jurisdictional line. And I also sort of note that FERC at this point says they are not going to adopt a universal interconnection process, that, though they did sort of caveat that they may revisit the issue if they discover abuses in the current processes or barriers to participation. So it does seem to be, we're taking this step. We're not going to go, to sort of making this sort of universal, but if that becomes a challenge that ultimately limits the effectiveness of what they're trying to do, they left the door open to revisiting it. And then, I think this is part of the piece of, and you see this in other orders too, but, are the states exercising continued jurisdiction in these areas? Are they doing it in order to frustrate FERC's purposes and the RTO efficiencies? And if that's the case, I don't know that it's improper for FERC to then address abuses. I would just hope that they would do it narrowly, as opposed to then asserting a whole new area of jurisdiction that then belongs to them because of a tangential connection to a legitimate purpose and some isolated instances of abuse.
Thanks. I'm going to turn to reliability. So what is the state role in DER reliability, and who is ultimately held responsible for a major outage, for when a major outage occurs? What is the solution when a reliability issue is located in a different state?
You can go ahead, Dan.
I can guarantee you that if there were major reliability issues, it's my phone that's going to ring and not MISO's. So regardless of who's at fault, I know who the governor's going to call. I know who is going to be called. And so I think, you know, that is just how it works. And so I think given that the states continue to, I mean, we can have arguments over if it's MISO's role to ensure reliability, if it's the states, and the resource adequacy issues that Jennifer's been talking about are real and important. It's, I think, why the states are never going to feel comfortable giving that away, because at the end of the day, we'll be held responsible for it, even if we're not. And
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree with Dan. And I think it's funny that this is a question because, so I alluded in my previous remarks that I alluded to the fact that our legislature has undertaken this energy policy development task force, and this question, not specific to DERs, but I think in a higher level, just general sense, this question was posed last Thursday to MISO, to NERC, and we had a representative from our state commission as well, and both NERC and MISO pointed directly back to the state. And so instead of, I guess, going like that, right? So I agree. I think the buck stops first at the state, and you know, we go from there at that point. But if these resources are sitting on the distribution system, I think the responsibility is clear.
Thank you both, and thank you, Paul Proudfoot, for submitting questions. If anyone else has any questions, please write them in too. I'm going to go to his question. He says that I see this as a big job for state commissions, both assisting MISO in developing a tariff as required by 2222 and developing internal state procedures to implement. The question is, how do we prepare? Ms. Richardson, would you like?
Sure, that's a great question. I think how you prepare is with opportunities like we're having right now, the opportunity to engage with our colleagues, other states that, again, they're may not be in the same situation as your respective state, learning from them. I think collaboration is absolutely necessary. Sometimes you don't know what you have until you do a complete inventory of what you have. Sometimes rules, we understand our rules in our states a little different than sometimes our industries do, right? There's that inherent conflict and tension there, certainly, but I think keeping an open dialogue and just, it's hard. I don't know that there's, of course I say all this, knowing that everyone is short-staffed, under budget, all of that sort of thing, right? And so you don't want to be spread too thin, but this wave, this transition of emerging technologies and the way the grid operates seasonally across multiple time horizons with different types of resources that are more decentralized, I mean, it's really changing the face of the energy landscape for every state. That's not unique to an Indiana, a Michigan, a Minnesota. It's for everybody. I mean, how you come at it is going to be dependent on, you know, your respective characteristics in your state. But I think as a general rule of thumb, keeping your dialogue open, doing an inventory of what you have in place, you know, polling and engaging your stakeholders in your states, that's what I would know to do.
More violent agreement between your panelists on this one. No, I mean, I think FERC is sort of trying to walk a line between having this effectuated very rapidly, and also understanding the how complicated all of this is. So, you know, I think the RTOs have to file something like 9 months after, you know, a compliance filing, and then propose a reasonable implementation date. So it's not that they have to have the whole thing done in 9 months, but they have to sort of give the plan and then a timeline for when it will be done. And I think, you know, that suggests that 9 months is nothing. And so the need to start the conversations between the states and MISO and PJM and the other RTOs is important to that it starts sooner rather than later in order to influence ultimately what goes into that, and then ultimately what is reasonable in terms of the ultimate implementation. And then I think sort of the states looking at this in terms of our continuing roles over things like interconnection and reliability and pieces, and how those then show up in how the DERs get aggregated, I think is going to be really important too. That just to try and understand the continuing overlapping areas of jurisdiction and how, you know, how states need to be able to exercise their jurisdiction on things that are sort of core to reliability and safety.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, I have one last prepared question. So if anyone has any other questions, please submit them. One concern with DER compensation is double counting, which very simply is a situation where a resource may be contracted to receive payment twice, but is only providing the service once. What do we know about double counting, and what would we like to better understand? Commissioner Scripps?
Yeah, I think this is going to be really challenging, particularly because, as I understand it, the FERC allows DERs to participate in retail programs that also participate in wholesale markets. And so understanding which attributes they're being compensated for, you know, could you, for example, to go back to Chris's question, be compensated for your, for the energy outflow under net metering, but also get credit for ancillary services in the RTO? I think those are really, really thorny questions. I was pleased that there is some role for state regulators in this, in terms of allowing us to sort of put on restrictions to try and avoid double counting. They need to be narrowly tailored. Again, it can't be an excuse to sort of opt out by another name. But I thought the sort of allowance for that and the recognition that this is going to be something where we need to address sort of two entities that don't always sort of talk to each other as much or share information in a fully transparent way, you know, to avoid sort of these double counting things. Because at the end of the day, and I think Jennifer, you know, talked about this in her first response, it's, you know, these can be beneficial to customers. They are less beneficial if customers, who are the ones that pay all the bills, are ultimately paying twice. And so that, I think, is good. But, and then some of the examples that FERC provided in terms of some of the issues that we could, as state regulators, consider in terms of developing rules to avoid double counting. And there's a role for the RTO to make sure that their systems and processes and compensation tariffs and other pieces are structured in a way to avoid this as well. But I'll say we get into these issues even at the state level, where programs are offering different things, and they may show up in a rate case for the capital investment, and then, you know, under an incentive program for something else. And how do you sort of stack all that together and make sure that there aren't being counted twice, and then you add another layer of sort of oversight and regulatory participation into that, and I think it's challenging.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. It's challenging at best. And from a policy standpoint, you know, from our governor's office, we don't seek to be prescriptive on how to do this. I mean, it's incredibly difficult at best. And I think hands down, this affordability question that's being, you know, dealt with across multiple states, including our own, including Indiana right now, is very thorny. And I think there's lots of different ways to get to an answer, but whether it's an optimal answer for different types of customers, that's a different question. And I think over time, you want to create a policy that's going to obviously do no harm, but create an environment that is not wrought with unintended consequences. That's the other thing. Sometimes when we design solutions when we don't even fully understand the problems. And so, you know, trying to take a very deliberate approach and trying to understand the individual pieces and their respective parts is going to be critical going forward.
Great. We have only 30 seconds left or so. I think everyone saw the 12:57 reminder. So just really quickly, is there any last thoughts before we go join the big room?
I like the backdrop. You got the NARUC manual up there that's highlighting. It's very well put together. Room Rater would give it a 10 out of 10.
Thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Yep, that's a NARUC DER manual. Great design. So great. Okay, well, I will leave the room and I will see everybody back. See you then.
Thanks.